Well, hello everyone, and happy Saturday to you as we get it's spring ahead today as we prepare for that as well. Welcome to Agree or Disagree the podcast, hockey edition on Saturday as we record here as the Canucks prepare to play the surging lookout, very dangerous Las Vegas Golden Knights tonight. We're going to get into that. We're going to talk a lot about Brock Boeser. We're going to talk about the collective panic of the Vancouver Canucks fan base last night from a tweet from Ben Kuzma. So we're hoping that everyone has woken up okay, but we'll see. And a little bit later on, we're going to be talking about the Utica Comets with Comets Cory, with the Jonathan Dahlin story. Getting off social media. We thought we'd get into what's going on in the Utica Comets. What's really going on? What's really not going on? Things like that. But with us today is Sean from Calgary. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Good. Everything is okay out there in Calgary? Is there panic in Flames world out there? Because, is there fire because of a 4-game losing streak?
I don't think there's too much panic right now. I just think there's just a bit of an antsy, just hoping that they can hang on to the division.
True. And Tyler, were you officiating any games?
No, I'm all done for officiating commitments for this season, as far as I'm aware. So I've had enough. so that's good. No, it's. Hockey's starting to quiet down. We've had some lovely sunshine here for the last little while, but we're expecting some more winter to return still, so people are getting a little anxious about that. But yeah, no, just trotting along as usual.
You didn't get attacked by a trainer?
No.
No, yes.
No.
Oh my gosh. That was something. That was crazy.
I'll tweet out that link again for people who are listening. Yeah.
Sure.
The fight must have been looked like Junior B or something like that, where the massive brawl and then the trainer went after the linesman. It's quite crazy.
See, I'm a referee, not a linesman, so I don't ever get involved in that kind of stuff.
But still, you must have heard it from the crowd in some way, shape, or form.
Well, I'm sure there's people that want to get out on the ice and get a piece.
Sean made the Daily Hive with a tweet about after the Canucks beat the Toronto Maple Leafs on Wednesday, crediting the interview that Dan Murphy did with Ron Hainsey. And because it was the first loss that the Leafs have lost leading after the third period. I mean, even Travis Green was happy with Murph. Listen to this.
That's right. Good to see. He's one of our best players tonight.
It's very rare that Travis Green goes and gives that kind of credit to the media, but wow, it was there. It was there. So yeah, it's been an interesting week this week, as always in Vancouver Canuck land, and there's always something to get the angst up a little bit. And this week, the angst, or it's been starting a little bit even last week, but even more this week, has been the play of Brock Boeser. Now, to be fair, he did assist on the winning goal in Toronto in overtime on Alex Edler. And he did okay in Edmonton, but he has not been the Brock Boeser we know and love. It's also been what's really interesting, though, this week, and Travis Green pointed this out. This week was the 1-year anniversary that he got clobbered by Kyle Clutterbuck into the boards that ended his season last year. So he's actually kind of in new territory. But are you concerned about the play of Brock Boeser, or what are your thoughts on what the expectations are around Brock Boeser?
I think there is I wouldn't say I'm not super concerned, but I think he definitely needs to go into this summer and look at how he can change a few things in his game, specifically how quickly he gets his shot off. Because if you look, I think he got spoiled last year playing with the Sedins a lot because teams would get sucked into their cycle and leave Brock just absolutely wide open, and he would have a day to set up his shot and release it. He doesn't have that time anymore, and he hasn't adjusted well enough to that. That being said, he still has. I think he's he's shown himself to be a better playmaker than last year, and improving on that. And I think if he does go into the summer and figures out how to get his shot off quicker, things will come a lot easier for him next year.
Yeah, I agree with all that. It certainly doesn't look like he has as much time and space to work with. That'll reduce the comfort level out there for sure. The other thing is last year around this time he went down to injury, and that was the end of his season. And so now this year we're seeing a full season of Brock Boeser, and I know he did miss some time towards the beginning of the season, but we've talked about this with the team in general. With a lot of younger players, Elias Pettersson looks like he's cooled off a little bit. The grind of the season, I think, is starting to show on Brock Boeser as well. So am I concerned? No. I mean, it's his second full season in the NHL. There's more of a book on him. Everything's tightening up out there. So, he's a dynamic enough player to figure it out. I think it's not a big concern. And for the Canucks, as far as contract negotiation goes, this isn't a bad thing.
No, it's probably not, because he probably want a lower contract. And that's been, I think, the bigger concern is not only his play, because we will be getting into contract negotiations in the summer with him. And the question has been coming up, do you do a bridge deal, or do you give him in the Nylander, whatever, somewhere within the William Nylander cap, which was around $7 million. I guess that's what do you do going forward? Now, his last 5 games, he's got 3 assists in the last 2 games against Toronto and Edmonton. He was -2 against Vegas, -4 against Arizona. He has not scored a goal in 8 games, and 2 in the last 10. So, yeah, a little bit sluggish. He's in the 15 to 20 minute ice range, so certainly can't be complaining price or ice time. But yeah, I guess in terms of contract, what are your thoughts? Do you go bridge here, or do you go higher?
I still go long term with him. Despite him not taking the next step as everyone expected him this year, he's still producing at a very good rate, and is still a back-to-back 20-goal scorer to start his career. And I don't doubt that he's going to go into this next summer and improve the release of his shot, and as well as become a better all-around player, because that's the other issue right now is his defense has struggled at times. But I think some of that is still getting used to conditioning and the speed of the NHL in only his second year. So I think you do go long term, because I think that long term, I think that makes the most sense. Short term, if you're looking at a bridge deal for 3-4 years, those first 2 years the Canucks are going to the extra money you're going to spend on a long term deal isn't going to hamper them cap wise anyway. So I think you go long term on a deal if the numbers are if the cap hit makes sense, and around that Nylander area I think makes sense.
If Boeser possesses the character that the
did you cut out there, Tyler?
Hello?
Tyler?
Oh, looks like we lost Tyler. Okay.
Did you kill it there, Kevin? Or
I did pause it. Oh, I just recorded again. That's okay. So we lost Tyler for a couple seconds, but he is back. So yeah, Tyler, continue there.
I was now train of thought's a challenge here. Oh, I was just going to say, I think from the organization's point of view, having him locked up long term makes sense in terms of culture and having the characters to build around and the type of core that they want. From the Boeser point of view and his representation, I don't know, maybe they might be more interested in a shorter term deal and seeing what the return could be on that next contract.
Go ahead, Sean. Yeah, it was one thing I'm interested to see going forwards is if we see more players, especially on the younger side, bet on themselves and take more and negotiate bridge deals going forwards because of the cap consistently going up not as drastic as it was at the beginning of the cap era, but still a mil or two a season. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how players like a Brock Boeser go into negotiations because of that. Because like we've seen a lot of teams and a lot of players sign long-term deals, but then you look at the Nathan McKinnons as a big and the Taylor Halls as examples who are drastically underpaid if you look at compared to players of their ilk signing a year or two later.
And long-term, I think historically long-term, we have seen that that's actually kind of, like my thought would be, it's been mostly been more harmful for the players in a lot of ways than good. I mean, the obvious example to that is Roberto Luongo, who had a long-term contract and couldn't get moved here for a really long period of time. Other players like that as well. So I could see Brock wanting to go short term, bet on himself, and see what happens, and take that because he's still, even in a short term way, if he plays well enough, he'll get that payday in unrestricted free agencies too. So I could see him wanting to be short term, but like because from the noise here, I think it's really important that we clarify, because it feels a little bit. Brock Boeser is still a key piece in this organization. He's still going to be, whether you think he is going to be a top-notch sniper in the top 10 or not, this guy is going to be at least a very quality National Hockey League player for a long time to come. I don't think there's any debate or question about that. It's just it feels to me like it's a young player learning this game, going through a learning curve, and really playing longer than he's ever had in his his hockey career, just learning the ropes of this game. That's what I have concluded to this. I don't see this as a complete disaster or a panic or anything like that. Like, some of that noise out there, but that's just me.
Yeah. I think we're at a tipping point where we'll see more younger players just bet on themselves. So, and if especially there's a lot of the one thing with Boeser though is that he doesn't have he can't get offer sheeted, and he doesn't have arbitration rights. So the Canucks do have a little bit of leverage on him there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
True.
Yeah, and so you put all that together, and if he stays cool down the stretch here, that would make you think even more that he'd want to bet on himself down the road as opposed to going for the long-term contract now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting going forward, and I mean, it also brings up the other point that I think in the offseason that the Canucks are going to have to elevate their talent even a little bit, because the game plan is you focus even on the power play. You know who to focus on the Canucks now, and you need to improve in a lot of areas in that way. And getting some players coming back would help. And it looks like the lines tonight, according to Batch Hockey, are Horvat, Roussel, and Jake Virtanen as returning tonight. We got Pettersson, Levo, and Boeser, Gaudette, Goldobin, Pearson, Beagle, Eriksson, Mott, Schaller, and Granlund will be the extras. Edler, Stetcher, Sockner, and Shen, Pouliot, Biega, Brisebois, and Tanev. The key name I said there, Jake Virtanen, is returning tonight after lengthy absence. And I like that line of Horvat, Roussel, and Virtanen.
Yeah, it's a big, heavy line who can be a bit of the shutdown line versus the couple of the one or two, like one of the top lines with Vegas, and they're not they've also got speed to it as well. So I like that line as a sort of like as a line that can produce offense and you're not going to be afraid to put them out against the top lines and have them try and shut it down, and then which will open up hopefully better matchups for the Pettersson line and even the Gaudette line if they with Pearson and Goldobin. I think that's an interesting line that we could see some offense from this tonight if they get the right matchups.
Yeah, Tyler. Oh.
Absolutely great sign to see Virtanen back. I was concerned it was going to go longer than this, so we'll see what kind of extra bite is added to the lineup tonight, especially with him playing on the same line as Roussel.
Yeah. And Chris Tanev not quite ready. According to Bachelor, he will not be there, but he sounds like he's close, so we could see him, and probably would be likely be bold to say maybe some of the last few games we see in Derek Pouliot in Vancouver Canucks colors. I would imagine. I don't know, but
yeah, depending on how healthy Hughes is with the shot block from yesterday.
Yes, let's get into that. So there was a tweet from Ben Kuzma. Alert, Quinn Hughes was getting x-rays after blocking a shot off his foot in the third period of Michigan's 3-2 overtime loss to Minnesota. It is not known yet if he'll be able to play Game 2 of the Big Ten quarterfinal series Saturday. And it was a gut reaction quickly from the Vancouver Canuck fan base, and it sounded like this.
No, God! No, God, please, no!
Yeah, it was something like that, but it lurks out a little bit later that it wasn't so bad. No word if he's playing yet. We'll have to look here, but it doesn't sound long term. So the possibility is, though, Quinn Hughes could be here as early as Wednesday to face the New York Rangers. So, I guess the question here comes out is, I think we're going to want to see Quinn Hughes. The fan base is going to want to see Quinn Hughes. But what's realistic here in terms of expectations? How much should he play the last few games of the season? What are we hoping for? Because there's a lot of hope on this kid. I mean, there was in the off season we had the Bobby Orr word thrown around this guy. So let's maybe calm down the expectations. What's realistic to expect from Quinn Hughes at this point?
Well, for me, it's that he doesn't look out of place. That'd be where I'd start.
Yeah, and the other there's two things to look for, and one is how does he look, and does he look out of place, or is he able to use his hockey sense and his speed to create offense, and can he defend, as well as I think we can't the one of the big things for future cap and expansion draft is how many games does he play. Because if he plays 10 or more, then there's that's 1 year off his contract, and the Canucks will most likely have to protect him going into the Seattle expansion draft.
And that what happened this week, this wasn't talked about a lot, but that's becomes even more important because they laid out a little bit of the expansion rules, and Vegas is actually exempt from being part of being part of the expansion draft. So they will not be losing players in this. But you also there's some rules around if Vegas can be involved in this or not. So this becomes a little bit of an interesting strategy how you hold these defensemen. So it's more important than I think people recognize. I know that some people may be going, no big deal with, but the rules about the expansion draft that came out this week in Raw v. Vegas, that's going to be key.
Yeah. Sorry, Tyler, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think a lot of other general managers are thrilled about that.
No, I can't imagine that, but
yeah,
that's from what I've heard. Yeah, they are happy.
I don't see the league changing their position on that, but I would have expected, especially given how strong Vegas looks, like they would be, part of the mix just like everybody else.
Yeah, because they legitimately they do not look like a traditional X-Men. They look like they've been in this league for 20 years now. So, yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. The other thing that'll be interesting is to see if franchises have learned from the debacle of the Vegas expansion draft. You're not going to be giving Seattle 2/3 of a first line for whatever Florida got back from Marchessault and Riley Smith.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and it'll be interesting to see how Seattle does that as well. But in terms of a last tweet, Rick Dollywall tweeted out Quinn Hughes is a game-time decision for the game today. Questionable with a foot injury, so it doesn't look like it's very long-term. But we could see him this week. We may not. I will get into this, I guess, a little bit more next week as we anticipate. But I imagine just getting this guy some ice, getting him kind of used to the NHL, seeing what he has, and it will be good to him, like Brock Boeser, another guy that will need to have a good offseason to be prepared for next year. And it'll be also interesting, and as we get into a little bit more of our next subject here, it will be interesting. I'm curious not that I think that this is going to be a terrible relationship or anything like that at all. But I'm going to be curious about the Quinn Hughes, Travis Green relationship because as we saw this week with Jonathan Dahl, as we have seen, it's a bit interesting. If Quinn Hughes comes and prepares to play, I think he'll be fine. But if he's off base, I think it'll be very interesting to see how this is handled.
Yeah, with Green, if you produce, you'll still get ice time. Brock Boeser is a prime example of that. He's not necessarily your best two-way forward, and has definitely struggled with it at times. But because he's continually producing, he's still getting ice time. And if Hughes produces, he'll still get it. He'll still get the ice time, and he doesn't necessarily need a lot, but. Yeah, it all comes down to production if you're not perfectly solid defensively with Travis Green.
Well, and then the other thing is how tired is the coach with a couple of other defensemen, right? I think that Hughes would be given a bit more leash depending on that part of the equation.
Yeah, he was not nice about Derek Pouliot this week. I don't know.
I mean, is anybody watching the team feeling good about Derek Pouliot right now?
I don't even know if Derek Pouliot is either. But I mean, for Travis Green to go to the media and say you have to ask him, that's said enough about where I think Travis Green is feeling about where Derek Pouliot is right now. But,
yeah. So going back to what I said, if Quinn Hughes doesn't look out of place, I think the coach is going to give him lots of opportunities.
Yeah, I agree. Before we bring in Comet Cory, we'll just quickly touch on this. The Toronto Maple Leafs have graced the West with their presence this week. They flooded the Saddle Dome with their cheers. They tried to flood the Rogers Arena with cheers, but to the Canucks fans' credit, I will say, not the Flames fans' credit, but the Canucks fans' credit, they tried to at least drown them out, probably because it was a closer game, and the Canucks won. but seeing them closer, paying them a little bit more attention than normally have, are we seeing a team that is for real, or are we seeing a team that we have? What do we think now?
Oh, there's definitely holes in the Leafs, and the narrative right now in the media is, are they tough enough to go up against the Boston Bruins? Which is, I think, is a legit question, because once the playoffs come, the whistles get put away a little bit more, and they get the rough and tumble plays get let go a little bit more, and the skilled players that have a lot more tough time creating space. But the Leafs are a very skilled team and a very fast team. One thing that I think we need to remember is that they're dealing with injuries a lot right now. Missing Nazem Kadri, who adds a lot of the toughness to that team, as well as a couple key defensemen in Travis Dermott and Jake Gardiner, who when you're missing two guys like that, you're gonna, as Canucks fans are noticing right now, you're gonna have issues playing defense, and you're gonna have good games and bad games.
Boston's 9-0-1 in their last 10 games. So in terms of talent, I mean, sure looks like Boston's getting it figured out right now. If they were to meet in the playoffs with the way the standings are now, they would have the home ice advantage. I mean, none of that bodes well for Toronto. If you had to ask me today, would the Leafs be able to win that series? I would lean towards no, but there's still 12 games left for them to find their game and get some guys back, such as Kadri, and see how they look. But some of the immediate reaction I saw on Twitter to the Leafs loss on Wednesday was, there goes their chance at home ice in the first round, and that's seemingly a thing for people. So yeah, I think I would say the same as Sean. There's holes in the Leafs game, but they're still a really good team. Yeah,
the Bruins have got a point in 17 straight games, or 18 straight games. They have at least.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I really like Mitch Marner. I mean, I really was impressed with him. Anderson was good. The concern again is defense. Yeah, the concerns are there with defense, and I think getting those guys back, I think it comes down to goaltending, what it always does in the playoffs. And Anderson has been at times great and has times struggled, but Tuukka Rask has been at times great and has at times struggled too. So who knows? I think it'll be an interesting series. But my big takeaway, though, was I was more impressed than I thought with Mitch Marner. I think that this guy does not get enough credit for how much he is with the Leafs. I think this guy might be, in my opinion, one of the better Leafs. Like almost.
He's the one who drives the play more than Tavares and more than Austin Matthews.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
Just one thing with the goaltending, Tuukka Rask is going to be a lot more well rested than Freddie Anderson.
That is very true.
Series, because they've split the games with Rask and Halak quite evenly.
Yeah.
So I don't if there's any issues with the goaltending on the Leafs, it's because they overplayed them.
Well, yeah, and they probably don't need to, but that's right now, because it's pretty obvious who they're playing in the first round. But I guess if you want that home ice advantage, you want to play him more, but you probably want to consider resting him. So we're about to get coming up here. We're going to kind of hit a pause. There's no commercial or anything, but you're going to hear a little bit of a pause. But we're going to be getting Comet Cory on. He follows the Utica Comets. We're going to talk about what happened with Jonathan Dahlin, as he made some news this week, as he has eliminated his social media, and what really is going on in Utica, the facts and not. So you'll hear a little bit of a pause, and then we will be back. All right, thanks for that brief pause there. Joining us now is a man that follows the Utica Comets quite closely. He is a colorectal cancer survivor. Remind you to get checked. Thoughts and prayers to Alex Trebek, by the way. Comets Cory, Utica Comets, a contributor for the Canucks Army, follows the Utica Comets at detail. Cory Hergott joins us. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you fellas doing?
I'm great. Sean and Tyler, how are
We're doing good.
Nice to have you along.
Yeah. And Cory has wearing a nice Zach McEwen shirt, repping the Zach McEwen, which we will get into as well. But the big story, or the big kind of attention that was caught this week, was Jonathan Dahlen. And he deleted his social media this week because he was facing some criticism from the fans. He had some things to say about the Utica Comets management, coach, and management. So, Cory, we'll kind of start with you, because when talking to you, you're kind of, what I appreciate from our conversation is you want to kind of get into the middle of here and eliminate the noise. So tell us from your perspective what you kind of have saw from Jonathan Dahlen, watching him all year, and what you're seeing from how the coaches approached him.
Well, I think the first thing I'll start off with is the thing that we need to there's a couple of things that we need to remember. First off, in regards to the coaching staff that's currently in Utica, their job at the moment is to supply players that will be NHL ready, that can play a regular shift under Travis Green. That being said, we know what Travis Green is like with his players in Vancouver. He demands a certain standard of your 3-zone sort of play. So that's one thing that we need to keep in mind. And the other thing that we need to keep in mind with the coaching staff in Utica is that they started the season with 6 rookie wingers for only 8 open roster spots on the wing. They also had Reed Boucher there, and if you give an AHL coach Reed Boucher, he's going to play the skates off of Reed Boucher. The guy's elite at that level. They also brought back Darren Archibald, which really kind of gummed up the works a little bit on the wings for some of the younger players as well. Zach McEwen was still there. Michael Carconi was still there, and he had tripled his goal totals from the previous season, up to 15. So he's a guy that should have been playing a regular shift. We knew that either one or both of Brendan Gaunce or Tyler Mott would be in Utica and would likely be on the wings as well. So when you wrap all that together, you can see that the coaching staff kind of had their hands tied a little bit by the management group with the sheer number of players that they had at their disposal that they were supposed to try to work into the lineup. Now, as far as Dahlen goes, he was a guy that last year when he first came in, he played 2 games at the end of the regular season. And to my eye, in those 2 games, he looked, really quite good as a free zone player. He was the first guy back on the back check on a handful of plays. And I really thought that kind of would endear him to the coaching staff. Now, fast forward to this year, and he came into camp, and he started the season off getting some games with guys like Tanner Caro and Brendan Gaunce and Zach McEwen, but he also saw time with guys like Carter Banks and Wasey Hamilton and Brendan Woods. Those last couple of guys that I've mentioned, I know they're not the sexy names that people in Vancouver want to hear about, but they are players on the team, and they're guys that generally play the middle as well, which is an area where there's not a whole lot of depth in Utica. So when you have to remember when names like Carter Banks and Wasey Hamilton and Cam Darcy and Brendan Woods are thrown around in the same sentence with Jonathan Dahlen, it's usually because they played the middle. Now, all of that said, Trent Cull has to demand a certain level of 3-zone play from his players, and it's the same with every player. It's not just Jonathan Dahlen who's held to that standard. So in order to get these guys, playing a more sound game in all 3 zones, he generally will play these younger guys to start the season off with at least one of his trusted vets kind of stapled to their hips. So Jonathan Dahlen did see a lot of time with players sort of down the lineup, I think, with the hope of improving the other side of his game. The offensive end of his game, it's clearly there. The guy is very highly skilled. I find him more of a playmaker than a goal scorer, but he's a smart player. He knows where to be on the ice. I really liked what I was seeing from him. His last handful of games, I was actually starting to see a lot more of that style of game coming along for him that would actually let him play for Travis Green down the road. So with the whole Dahlin situation, to me, it just feels like both sides sort of gave up a little bit. I think Jonathan Dahlin can still be a player in the NHL. I think he might have a bit of a tough road ahead of him with who's in front of him in San Jose. But, if he's a determined player, I think he can get there. But like I say, I think it was just a little bit early from both sides to pack it in on the situation.
Yeah, it was. I think the only thing that concerned me was his 5-on-5 production. It wasn't up there. He seemed to be producing a majority of his points on the power play.
Yeah, and that's part of the issue I think that he has now and will continue to have going forward until he kind of figures out the North American game. He was producing really well on the power play, but I mean he had more time and space to work with that extra guy off the ice. At 5-on-5, I think part of the reasoning behind playing him with players like Wasey Hamilton and Brendan Woods, those guys play a bit of an aggressive style of game, a hard forechecking game, and their motors are always going. And I think that was sort of maybe a little bit of Trent Cull's way of hopefully opening up a little bit more ice for Dahlin to be able to work. But he kind of needs to have a finisher on his other side, and guys like Wasey Hamilton and Carter Banks and those sorts, they're not real great fitters. They make a bit of room for him, but he still needs a Zach McEwen or a Cole Lind or somebody like that on the other side that can maybe put a puck in, or a Reed Boucher. I mean, I really would have liked to see Dahlin get more reps with Boucher on his off wing, because I think that would have helped him produce a little bit more at 5-on-5.
I guess my question is, if looking at this from Dahlin's perspective, is other forwards that got the call-up opportunities with the Canucks, he doesn't get the call-up. What is it that they would have been doing differently, in your opinion, as opposed to Dahlin? Because that seems to be the frustration, is that he wasn't getting his NHL opportunities quickly enough.
Well, I mean, if we look at who's been called up ahead of him this year from Utica, Brendan Gaunce went up really early, played 3 games, and then he was back down. Adam Gaudette went up, but Adam Gaudette plays the middle, so Jonathan Dahlin wouldn't have been taking that spot. Zach McEwen came up. I have all the time in the world for Zach McEwen to get NHL looks. He's already put a season and a half of hockey in with the Comets. He's a guy that the coaching staff has been able to trust, because they've watched from being a guy that was, had issues with his skating and was used as a net front power play guy and that sort of thing, to a guy that they can't really live without in Utica at the moment. I mean, McEwen's playing penalty kill, he's playing power play, he's eating up minutes at 5-on-5. He's put in the work, he's earned the trust of the coaching staff there, and he's going to have to do the same when he gets to the NHL level as well. I mean, when McEwen is a full-time, like when he gets up later this year again or next season, it'll be the same scenario for him that is for guys like Cole Lind and Jonah Gadjevich in Utica right now. He's going to have to bide his time and earn the trust of Travis Green when he gets here. So I think if Jonathan Dahlin was concerned that a guy like Zach McEwen was getting called up ahead of him, I think that's kind of misplaced concern. I think McEwen has a much more NHL-ready game than Jonathan Dahlin does at this point. I mean, honestly, I don't think Jonathan Dahlin would get more than 3 or 4 shifts under Travis Green or he'd be stapled to the bench. I just think there's a fair bit more work to do with his game. That said, he does have that built-in sort of chemistry with Elias Pettersson, and it's entirely possible that he could have come in and played on Pettersson's line, and the magic could have been reignited, and Dahlin could have just stepped right in and been an NHL player and without any issues. But I really doubt that would have been the case.
What is Jonathan Dahlin's personality like? Like, did he come in thinking, I'm a top prospect, treat me like a top prospect, or was he more, okay, develop my game, I'm willing to earn my time and earn my keep? I feel like that's a little bit too extreme. But basically, what is it? What was his personality like?
Well, being based in BC, I'm not really around the players all that often. I mean, I can tell you a little bit about the personalities of a few players that I've actually been able to interact with face to face, but Jonathan Dahlen isn't one of those. Kind of all I can sort of go off of is from what I've been reading from the press clippings from since he's been traded, and I think we have to take some of that with a bit of a grain of salt because there's going to be a little bit of a translation issue from Swedish to English. From what I've read, it sounds like he knows that he has work to do on his game. But that he did think that he should have been given some sort of an opportunity, probably further up the lineup with the Comets, and that I can understand from his perspective. I mean, if I was a highly skilled young prospect, and if I had my choice of playing with Tanner Caro and Reed Boucher, or with Vincent Arsenault and Brendan Woods, I'm pretty sure I'd be picking the first two. That said, guys like Zach McEwen and Michael Carcone last year, like, they didn't have a whole lot to work with either when they were coming up, and as well this year. I mean, they all had the same centermen, they all had the same wingers to work with. Pretty much anybody not named Reed Boucher on the wing has shuffled around the lineup, and so if a guy like Zach McEwen, wasn't drafted, many thought he wasn't worth a contract, but if he can still put up points playing with Brendan Woods and Wasey Hamilton, then a guy who's as highly skilled as Jonathan Dahlen should be able to do the same. Yes, he doesn't have as many pro games as Zach McEwen in North America, so there's going to be an adjustment period. And I think we were seeing that adjustment period play out this year. Dahlen came in last season, and a lot of folks in Utica were a little bit put off because he came in with mono and he wasn't quite ready. So he went home to Sweden, and there were I see a lot of fans based in Utica that weren't super thrilled with that sort of the optics of and then when he came over this year, and we saw a bit of complaining about the ice time and that sort of a thing, so there's a lot of fans in Utica had the same sort of opinion from that scenario, that maybe he's a little bit entitled, and I don't like to paint any player with a bad brush by any means, so I won't really go down that road. But I really think it was an issue for Dahlen in Utica. The biggest thing for him was not being able to find the time and the space to do what he was able to do overseas, and I think it was a very similar issue for Petrus Palmu before he headed over earlier in the season. I think Palmu's a guy that's probably going to come back next season and be, a little bit of fire in his belly to prove everybody wrong that he can play at this level. So I'm really looking forward to see what he does when he comes back across, if he does next year.
Sean, Tyler?
Yeah, I think it would have been interesting to see Dahlen with a little more consistent ice time with the top players. But as I think my biggest parallel with Dahlen is Goldobin and the treatment that he's been getting this year from Travis Green, and we're starting to see the results of that now, where his motor is finally up at the level that Green is looking for and the club is looking for. So it's unfortunate that they weren't able to be a little more patient to see if that's where they could get him.
Yeah, and I agree with that 100%. And last year, when Goldobin was first called up, and I had mentioned at that time that I didn't think that his 3-zone game was up to snuff to play for Travis Green, like to get a regular shift, and that kind of proved to be the case, as it's really kind of taken until, the last handful of weeks where he's looking like a player that Green might actually, have some time for long term. And that's the same sort of same sort of situation that I see with Jonathan Dahlen. They're both really good playmakers. They're both very highly skilled guys, and they both feel that they're working very hard when they're on the ice, and maybe had a little bit of a difficult time understanding what the extra ask was from the coaching staff. And we're seeing Goldobin figuring it out, and as I said earlier, I was starting to see Dahlin figuring it out in the AHL. So I agree. This was just this could have if Dahlin could have hung in, or if the Canucks could have hung in until the end of this season, I think we could have possibly had a much better situation heading into next year. With if you had a guy like Jonathan Dahlin ready to push for a spot at the start of next year, or maybe by Christmas time. If you had a guy like Zach McEwen ready to push for a spot out of camp, I mean, that's what this team needs. That's what they need to push guys like, Ryan Spooner out of the lineup, and Tim Schaller and Marcus Granlund, and even a Tyler Mott, although I still I have time for Tyler Mott's game.
Yeah, I do too. I've talked about on the podcast before how I'm amazed at how he's been able to maintain his spot with the Canucks the entire season. He's really picked it up this year for sure. Then this media narrative, not that it's a huge one necessarily, but the narrative that seems to be out there that there's something broken with the Comets in terms of being able to be a pipeline of talent for the Canucks. What do you make of all that? Like is there some merit to that, or is it certain writers reaching for material? Like what's your take on all that?
Well, I think people have a point that since the Comets, this is their 6th season in Utica, and there hasn't been a whole lot of real good stories coming out of there as far as high-end prospects that paid their dues in the minors and turned into be good pro hockey players for the Canucks at the NHL level. But that said, the management group, when they first came in here and they put that team in Utica, there wasn't a whole lot to work with there. Even last year, which was the first year for the current coaching staff in Utica, they had, for rookies up front, they had Zach McEwen to work with and Alexis Daou. Now, both of those players were undrafted. On the back end for rookies, they had Guillaume Brisebois and Jalen Chatfield. Chatfield was also undrafted. If we look at that group of 4 rookies, Guillaume Brisebois was in that group as well. And if we look at that group, we've seen, Alexis Daou has been moved out. He's bouncing back and forth between the AHL and the ECHL. Jalen Chatfield, I firmly believe, would have been looking at an NHL cup of coffee by the end of this season if he hadn't have broken his foot early on. Guillaume Brisebois, former 3rd-round pick, who's really kind of maligned in this market because the team really likes him. I don't really understand why people have to give that kid a hard time, but he's played NHL games. Zach McEwen played NHL games this year. So if you look at what the group had last year to work with, I think that's a pretty decent success story. A guy that was an undrafted player, Michael Carconi, went from 5 goals to 15 goals under them and was turned into Josh Lebo. So that's got to be considered somewhat successful. Ashton Sautner is another undrafted player. He spent 2 seasons under Green. He spent last season under Trent Cull, and most of this, all of this season, but he missed 2 months with an injury. But there's another undrafted player that's playing NHL games. Now, I think that's got to be considered somewhat successful. This year, they dropped in 6 rookie wingers, a rookie center, and a rookie defenseman in Utica. That's a lot of raw rookies to be for one coaching staff to deal with in one season. And, did it work out 100% perfectly? No. We've seen Petrus Palmu head back to Finland. We've seen Jonathan Dahlin moved on to San Jose. So, those are 2 prospects that Palmu could still come back. We've lost Dahlin, maybe Linus or Linus, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, Carlson. Maybe he turns into a player that, is a decent piece down the road for this team. But if you look at the rest of the guys, Polin has taken big steps, in my opinion, this year in his 3-zone game. I think the offense will continue to start trickling in for him as the defense side sort of picks up. Jonah Gadjevich had a tough time getting into the lineup to start the year, and part of that has to do with his skating is going to be a bit of an issue that he's going to need to continue to work on. He's a really smart player, knows where to be. He just needs to be able to get there a little bit quicker. But the other thing with Jonah that I think a lot of people are going to, maybe you'll find out at the end of the year, is I believe he's been playing the bulk of the season with a banged up wrist still. That's been an ongoing issue for him, and I think that's kind of hampered his ability to play, to really bite in and play the kind of game that's made him successful in his career. And I think that's something that people are going to need to consider when they worry about his ice time or the amount of minutes that he gets and that sort of a thing. I've seen Jonah take big steps. I've seen him. I think he's got some pretty underrated hands as a playmaker for the role that he's been playing for the Comets this year. He hasn't really seen a whole lot of time up the lineup. He's been mostly used as a third or fourth line guy, playing with third or fourth line guys. But he's hard on the forecheck. He's making plays to some of these guys, and I can't help but think if he had a finisher on his line that he could maybe be picking up a few more assists as well. Lukas Jasek to me is a guy that, like, I can see him being an NHL player down the road. I think he'll still take a little bit of time, but he's a guy that's super tenacious in all three zones. He's really his offense is really dried up. He's their leading rookie right now with 20 points, but I don't think he's had a point in his last 7 or 8 games. But he's still a useful player on the other side of the puck when he's not producing points, which is why he's a guy that doesn't really seem to get yanked out of the lineup very often at all. His motor's always going. He's a guy that always wants the puck. If he doesn't have it, he's trying to get it back. So I think there's success stories in Utica. I just think people need to be patient. I know that my expectations for a handful of these guys were far higher at the start of the year than they probably should have been. I wrote articles saying that I thought, Cole Lind could push for 20 goals, that Petrus Palmu could possibly push for 20 goals, and clearly that's not happening for either player with this team this year. I wouldn't rule it out for next season, but it's just one of those things. I think we need to be patient with these guys.
Yeah, I think the expectations for Dahlin and Lind specifically, I think were quite high for the Canucks fan base. I know I had big expectations for Dahlin, but the one thing I look, as you said, it's only the second year under Trent Call for the Comets, and I think the fact that, as you said, they're getting decent games out of Ashton Sotner and Zach McEwen specifically, it is a win. The way I look at it is, if you look at throughout the NHL, how many top end, like, first line players play significant amounts in the AHL? Not very many. They're all more that depth player, that secondary scoring and low work player that's going to be the one that comes out of the AHL more than anything else. And they don't come out in bunches. They come out one or two at a time, if you're lucky in an organization. And if the Canucks can have McEwen and Sotner step up and be at least options with the NHL team next year, I think that's a huge win. And I think that's something that is lost in the narrative that there's something wrong in Utica with the development of players.
Yeah, it's a good point you make there, Sean, because Horvat, straight out of junior, he's drafted, played one more year at junior, and then came up with the Canucks, and then Boeser straight out of the NCAA, and Pettersson straight out of Sweden.
Yeah.
So so the top three guys there, I mean, they've bypassed the Comets essentially.
Well, and if you kind of take a look at how Horvat came in with the Canucks as well, I mean, he played, I think, 4 or 5 games with the Comets, but he came in as a fourth line center with the Canucks and worked his way up each season that he's been here. That seems to have worked out pretty well for him so far as starting at the bottom end of the lineup and learning the pro game. Now, that's the thing. Part of the thing that people need to remember as well with these young kids. Cole Lind knows how to score goals. He's been doing it his whole career. Does he know how to score goals at the AHL level yet? No. That's going to take a little bit of time. But that's not going to be the hard part for him. What he's going to need to learn at the pro level is how to play in the neutral zone and how to play in the defensive zone. Those are the areas that the team needs to work with him on. Same with Jonah Gadjevich, same with Jonathan Dolan when he was there, same with Petrus Palmu. This is the thing that I know it's people when people on Twitter, when I bring this sort of stuff up, I get painted with a brush that I'm only trying to pump out positives about the team and I'm on the team's side with everything and I agree with everything they do. That's not really the case, but I can step back from my own opinion and look at what the team is doing and try to see it through their eyes, grasp on what they're trying to do. And I really do believe that when you see these younger players playing down the lineup with the grinder types of players, it's 100% to do with getting that younger player to buy into playing that 200-foot game that we keep hearing about. And once they get that end of it figured out, the offense will come for them. Kind of the way it is. And that's what seemed to work pretty well for Zach McEwen last year doing that. I think he's a guy that this organization can kind of hold up as a bit of a shining example of how players you have a player that wasn't drafted and within less than 2 seasons he's played in games, he's picked up a point. He had a pretty solid level and showed that he can come up and play at this level and contribute in ways that this team needs, and that's considered a bit of a success for sure.
Well, even you talk about, you tweeted about a week or so ago about Ashton Sotner has played 11 NHL games, and you emphasize he's only been on the ice for 1 goal a game. But this is an example of development, of a guy taking the time and learning the game, learning the tools of the trade, and being more prepared in the NHL. And I have to say, I don't think Ashton Sotner is looked out of place at all up here so far. So there is something obviously that is working in what they're doing down there.
Well, that's one thing that I often come back to in my own mind when I see negative things being said about the coaching staff for Utica. Is I had the opportunity to speak with Ashton Sotner at training camp in Whistler. I had the opportunity to speak with Guillaume Brisebois, with Zach McEwen, and all of these guys to a man, without being asked specifically, what do you think of your coaching staff? They gushed about how they coached in Utica, about how the coaches took the time to identify areas of work and they coached them through it. Now, the other thing that was said by these players is like Trent Cull he pulls no punches. So his style might be a little bit abrasive for somebody for that, like that style of coaching, but he's a guy that'll tell you like it is. If you've missed an assignment, he's going to let you know that you missed that assignment, but he's also going to let you know how to not miss that assignment. Ashton Sotner told me specifically that at his exit meetings last season, the coaching staff asked him to up his physical game, bring more intensity, bring more of a physical element to the game this season. And to his credit, he spent his off season working on areas to help that area of his game. And it's pretty clear when you watch him play. When I watched him play at the Utica level, he was ridiculously abrasive. He was brutal on anybody that came near him, and he was kind of been doing the same thing in the games that I've been able to see him in Vancouver. And that's just an example of a player taking what the coach has asked him to do, and he's implemented it into his game effectively, and he's playing NHL games because. So, back to the Dolan thing, I really think it was just too soon. I think Dolan could have implemented the areas the thing coach want into his game, and that's also. Yeah, I think there's definitely some success happening. It's just a matter of patience and expectations.
And I also think from the coaching perspective, we have to remember that this is not an NHL coach. And what I mean by that is this is we're developing players, but we forget that a lot of these are developing to be NHL coaches as well. And there's a learning curve in actually learning how to coach. So Trent Cull is going to make mistakes. Trent Cull's not going to get this right or get this perfect or get this always right, but he's also learning as well. So, and that's the point of the AHL is to learn, right? That's the point of minor leagues, is to learn. And I think maybe a little bit more patience needs to be given on him as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. This is only Trent Cull's second year as a head coach at this level, and he's learning on the fly here as well. That's really good to make. Of course he's going to make mistakes. Everybody does. And first little bit on the job, and he's going to have his learning moments, just like the players do out on the ice. And would I be surprised if he comes back next season with maybe a somewhat softer approach for players? I wouldn't be super surprised. At the same time, I also be surprised to see him, stick to his guns and like I say, he's got to send players to the NHL that Travis Green will give a regular shift to, and until that changes, I think he's going to keep asking the same sort of things from all the players who play for him.
Yeah, I think it's. I like the way Cull is coaching in terms of tandem with Travis Green, and I think because they're both in their second season of learning how to coach at their specific levels, I think having the patience to let them learn and let them figure out what works and what doesn't is very important. I think if you look at Green specifically this year, the way he treated Michael Delzato last year versus this year shows learning and him figuring out what works and what doesn't. One thing I was gonna say earlier is I wonder what the thought process and the way the fan base looks at Utica would be had Olli Juolevi not been injured for the whole season, because it looked like he was stepping into Utica and being a big part of that team pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think Olli Juolevi could have been another sort of a success story this year, although in the same way that people will say that Adam Gaudette and Thatcher Demko really only developed in college and not in Utica, which I don't necessarily agree with 100%. Time didn't stand still for Adam Gaudette when he went to Utica. He worked on his game, and he created new opportunities and more opportunities on the ice when he was out there. He figured a few more things out. But yeah, I mean, you're going to have time and space issues at this level. You're going to have adjustment issues at this level, and it's going to be that way for a lot of players, and that's just the way it's going to be.
Going forwards next year, the Canucks are going to be adding most likely a Will Lockwood to the mix, and I don't, as much as we would like to see Zach McEwen become a regular with the Canucks next year, I don't necessarily see that to start. Do you see the Canucks and the Comets loading up on wingers again next year? Because they've just been riddled with injuries the last two seasons, both up front and on the blue line, and have been dealing with pro tryout contracts a lot.
Yeah, like last year was my first year covering the team, and it was a really, really ridiculous year as far as injuries and call-ups were concerned for the Comets. They used so many PTO players out of the ECHL and had to play those players, in kind of prime roles at times, and that's certainly not ideal. right now the team has 11 players on AHL contracts. 6 of those are forwards, 5 of them are defensemen, and they've used every single one of them except for Brendan Bradley, who's a forward playing in the ECHL this year with Kalamazoo. They've also used not nearly as many, but they've also used a handful of players on PTOs this year as well. Currently, for next year, they've got Carter Banks and Wasey Hamilton are on AHL deals to come back. That'll be their final year on those contracts. So guys like Cam Darcy, Brendan Woods, Reed Gardner, Kyle Thomas, Brendan Bradley, Brandon Anselmini, Jagger Dirk, Stefan LeBlanc, Dylan Blugis, Jesse Graham, and Vincent Arsenault. All of those guys are going to be unrestricted at the end of the year. They're all guys that have been on AHL deals. I could see the team bringing some of those guys back. I don't know if they'll bring them all back. The other thing that I really, really wonder about is we've got 3 restricted free agents playing in Utica right now that I'm kind of wondering whether or not they'll be back for next season, and they're all playing big roles with the team. You've got Brendan Gauntz, who, from what I understand, had teams calling about him at the trade deadline, and Jim Benning didn't move him on, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's a move that gets made at the draft to pick up an extra pick this year. I know Brendan Gauntz wants another NHL opportunity, and he may not get that in Vancouver, and if there were teams that were sniffing around him, there's probably a good chance his agent's going to want to explore him to one of those teams. Reed Boucher, who's been, unbelievable for the Comets since he's been there. He's a guy that he's another restricted free agent. The Canucks control what goes on with him. They can give him a qualifying offer, and if he accepts it, he comes back, or they can give him another deal. I kind of wonder if Boucher might, he hasn't got a sniff with the team this year. He's easily been their best player all season long. I could see him maybe saying no thanks to the qualifying offer and heading overseas to maybe make a few more dollars and play somewhere different than Utica possibly, and hopefully have another team, see him and maybe get another NHL opportunity down the road. So I'm not sure whether or not he's going to be back. And the other guy is the guy that's been their first line center all season, is Tanner Caro. He's got 49 points this year, having a career season. He's done everything in Utica. He's worked the power play, worked the penalty kill. He's been their best center at evens. And he hasn't gotten a sniff with the team. He's another guy that wants another NHL chance. So he's another guy I'm not sure if he's back next year. So it really leaves the team thin down the middle. So if they are going to bring in more players, I'm hopeful that we see at least another center or two picked up that are actual prospects. Otherwise, we'll probably see Cam Darcy and Brendan Woods back play in the middle next year, and that's not necessarily ideal in my opinion. I'd like to see the team, with all the depth on the wings. It'd be nice to have some playmakers in the middle for those wingers to help the kids produce points as well as work on their 5-on-5 game. Like even a guy like Michael Chaput, who was traded for Tanner Caro at the AHL level, he's a guy that would make a lot more sense for the Comets than a Cam Darcy or a Brendan Woods. He's a guy that plays a responsible 200-foot game. He's a guy that can also put up points. So kind of see them go down that path. If they're going looking to bring in more bodies, I'd like to see them try to find some more playmaker types to add to these, the grinder types as far as the AHL level guys.
What about? Oh, go ahead, Tyler.
I was just going to ask Cory where you're at with the Comets' playoff chances.
Oh boy, well, the Comets aren't doing themselves any favors right now. They've lost their last 3 games. Fortunately for them, Belleville, who's the team they're tied for in points with, they've also lost their last 2 games. Unfortunately, those last 2 games came against Cleveland, who are now just 2 points behind Belleville and Utica for the fourth and final playoff spot in the North Division. So between the way the Comets have been playing, their special teams have really fallen off of a cliff this in the second half here. They've since I've been watching the team, they've generally been pretty sound on their special teams. Their penalty kills generally been in the top 10, and their power play's been in the top 10, and their penalty kills usually been in the top 5 or 6. This year, power play right now I think is around 13th, and their penalty kill at 21st. So that not helping their chances with the playoff. I think it really hurts the team that Luke Shen wasn't papered down for the playoffs. He really stabilized the back end, because the back in Utica has just been a real sore spot all season. Not having Ashton Sautner and Guillaume Brisebois around right now isn't helping the team either, because Shen, Brisebois, and Sautner, that's three of their top 4 defensemen basically. Add Oli Ulevi to the mix, and you've got 4 of your top 4 basically out for extended periods now. That's not helping the team. They're having a real hard time scoring goals too, and they've been putting shots on net, but they're just not creating the quality chances that they need to get the goals. But one thing I will say about this team, and we saw it last year when they had a ragtag group of PTO guys and AHL contracted players. Trent Cull has a way of getting this team to pull on the same end of the rope, and they kind of have shown in the past they have an ability to score goals in bunches, where I've seen them down 3-0, and in 3.5 minutes they've got the game tied. So I never really count the team out, but they're really going to have to take, and they're going to have to get some bounces going their way as well, I think, to be able to make the playoffs. So once they get there, I think anything's possible for them, though.
So for those who don't know, just quickly before I ask about goaltending, how does the playoff structure work in the AHL? Is it top 4 in each division? How does that work for those who don't know?
Yeah, so it's top 4 teams in each division make the playoffs, because you've got the teams in the East play 76 games in the season, and you've got the teams in the West play, I believe, 68. So if you just look at points, you're kind of fooling yourself a little bit. You have to look at winning percentage, and like right now, the Comets, their winning percentage is just ever so slightly better than Belleville's. So if the playoffs were to start today, Utica would be the team making it out of Belleville, but that changes really quickly. If the Comets lose today, Belleville's winning percentage might step up above them. So it is going to be a game-by-game thing the rest of the way for them. It's going to make for some exciting hockey, which should be fun.
So what about, because Demko was also not papered down, what is the goaltending situation like in Utica?
So they've got Michael Layton, and they've got Merritt Mazant, alternating back and forth. They're 2 veteran goalies, so I don't know that goaltending will really be an issue so much as it's going to be a defense issue for this team going forward. Like right now, if I look at their defense, they've got Brandon Anselmini playing with Jamie Cyphers. Anselmini's barely played in the AHL this year. They've got Jesse Graham playing with Colton Saucerman. Graham is a pretty solid offensive contributor, but he's a bit of an adventurer in his own end. Colton Saucerman, God bless him, love the guy, love his name, love his beard. He's a handy guy to have around. He's great in the room, but if he's being used as a regular rather than being spotted in, I think that's not a recipe for success. I think he's a guy that can contribute, kind of like Alex Viega as a fill-in guy, but if you're using him on the regular, that's not necessarily. And yesterday they had Matt Petgrave playing with Jalen Chatfield. Petgrave put up a lot of points. He's been forward. He's not necessarily a super sound defensive guy either. And unfortunately for Jalen Chatfield, he's had a real string of bad luck in his last handful of games where he's had pucks going in off of him, where he's coughed up the puck, had miscues with his defensive partner. So the defense is really more of the sore spot right now, I think, than the goaltending for the team. So if they can get that defense to dial things in a bit, I think you'll see a lot fewer goals getting past these guys.
Is there anything else we want to touch on here?
I think we've done a real good deep dive into the Utica Comets. Thanks, Corey.
Yeah, this was great.
And I would add too that your perspective, Corey, I think kind of confirmed what the three of us were thinking about them. Patience is the key word you keep giving us there, and that's something in Vancouver that is always a struggle to get. Patience from the fans.
Well, I think part of that is because, let's face it, it's been a long time since this team has had a lot of prospects for us to really kind of get excited about, especially all at once. And when we saw, Cole Lind came in last year at the end of the season and played a couple of games. Jonathan Dolan played a couple of games at the end of the season. Lucas Yashik came in at the end of the season and looked like he was going to be a 30-goal scorer with the way he played. So starting this season, I can understand the excitement and the high expectations coming into the season. For me, 5-6 games into the season, it was very apparent that patience was going to be needed the rest of the way. You could see that these guys they were not ready for this level to be playing a regular shift. Cole Lind and Jonah Gadjevich specifically have said several times to the media that the jump from the AHL level from junior to the AHL level was far bigger than they thought it was going to be. There were things that they could get away with at the junior level that they just can't get away with at this level, and it takes time for players to learn that sort of a thing. And if we can show some patience with these guys, I think we'll be rewarded down the road. I think folks that are thinking Jonah Gadjevich is going to be a top 6 forward for the Canucks, I think you're setting yourself up for disappointment. I think he's going to be a very very solid fourth line guy that can, play some power play in a net front role, maybe do some work on a penalty kill if they can work that into his game in Utica. But I don't see him as being a guy that ends up in the NHL level as a top 6 forward. Cole Lind, I'm not sure I see him as a top 6 necessarily, more of a middle 6 guy. When he gets to this level, I think he's a guy that can end up being an effective two-way player. He's a guy that I think Travis Green will have a lot of time for when he gets to the NHL level if he keeps going the way he has, because since they put Lind with guys like Hamilton and Arsenault and Woods and those kind of grinder type of guys, Lind's physical game and his forechecking game and his want to have the puck it's clearly taken huge steps. You can see him competing much harder, whether he has the puck or not, when he's playing with those guys. And I can kind of see him fitting in that sort of a middle 6 role of a guy that can get a little greasy in the corners. He's a pretty good playmaker too, which I kind of looked at him as being more of a goal scorer type coming into this season, but I've seen some pretty nifty passes coming off of his stick this year too. So I like what I've seen from him, but I don't know that I see him as being Elias Pettersson line 8 more than I see him maybe being a better fit with a Gaudette on the third line.
Cool. Well, Corey, thank you so much again for bringing this perspective. As Tyler and Sean, I like the reasonableness of this. I really appreciate that. I think hopefully for Canuck fans and Canuck Nation, they and even if other fan bases are listening, they can get a kind of a perspective, because sometimes I don't think it's just necessarily a Canuck problem, but I do think it's an NHL problem, just a higher expectation than sometimes needed to be. So really appreciate your perspective. Thank you very much for coming on.
Happy to come on, guys. Thanks for having me on. Much appreciated.
For those who don't know how to follow you, by the way, Corey, just let us know.
I'm at Cory Hergott, CoryHergott on Twitter. You can find me at Canucks Army, where you can see all of my articles that I've written for Canucks Army since the start of last season.
Cool.
Hopefully, we'll be seeing some more stuff this summer. I'm looking to maybe start rewatching the games this year over the off season, and maybe do a little bit of actual tracking of the players, as well as far as ice times and shifts and line mates and that sort of a thing that I can't really do in as great of detail when I'm doing these post-game reports.
That's fair. Sean, how do we follow you?
I am BeardyCanuck03 on Twitter.
And Tyler?
And I'm at T-Noble, T-N-O-B-L-E.
Of course, and I am at Kevole. Thanks, guys, for listening, and we will talk to you all very soon. Bye for now.